Welcome back. We have our new book that we're reviewing. It only has 7 chapters, so like this is 2 chapters a week. I mean, it's 50 pages that we have to read each week, but our last week will only have chapter 7 to go over, so that'll be maybe a quicker one, and then we'll kind of review the whole book.
That really going to take the whole month?
The whole
Like I guess if we're sectioning it out, it just February feels is a lot shorter than January, and January felt like forever. I don't know.
Not that much shorter.
Just bad math. Here I'm thinking, oh, well, we're going to get through this in 2 weeks.
4 weeks. No, we're still 4 weeks total. 4 weeks.
Amazing.
4 weeks.
Well,
How
hi Jess. How are you?
I am great. I'm so excited. I went and obviously you're with me, but going and looking at new houses and picking out all of my colors and my countertops that I
Yay.
want and the extra add-ons and the floor color. Like I'm just so excited to be buying my first house. I feel like I've been waiting forever for it's not the first house. Like we had a house when I was married, but it's just my house. I get to pick everything that to have it the way I want. And the add-ons are adding up. It's a little expensive, but I went and I looked at the plank floors in all the rooms versus the carpet that they put everywhere. And it's just a whole completely different feel of house to me. And having 2 dogs, like I'm just like not interested in carpet, bedrooms only. That's it.
Yep.
Carpet everywhere else. I am thinking though, because like the one living room, so I'm definitely gonna go with the Bradford floor plan. I'm contemplating putting the front porch on or not, because that front room where the dining area is, that's going to be like our podcast recording area. So I don't know if I should put carpet in there or if I should have it hardwood floor and just have a rug in there. I don't know what would be better for like sound.
Oh. That's a good question to ask our tech guy.
Yeah, well, that's the tech.
Because I don't know much
No.
about the insulation of things.
Well, that's like when he was asking me questions about like building the house. I was like, this isn't just, I mean, it is my house. This is my home. I'm like, but it's also my office.
Right.
It's my workspace. I said, this is where we're going to be recording our podcast. Like, so it's my business as well as my home. So I want it all to fit everything.
Walk from room to room and like this is clearly where I work. This is clearly where I eat breakfast.
I need separate rooms for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I remember that being online, that it was just not the exact same situation, but during COVID, when I would work down here and then I would go upstairs, it almost felt like I lived in an apartment complex because everything I did
and
upstairs,
those things, you're in the basement.
yeah, like this was nothing but work. And then everything was when I would get off Zoom after 6 hours, I would be upstairs and I would not see this again until the next time I had to go to work. So, but yeah, that was important for me to separate that because otherwise you feel like you never leave it. You
Yeah.
never get personal time.
And
But
the dogs need their own room.
yeah, you know what though? I think I didn't it wasn't
Garage.
just like,
Here's
oh,
the garage. This is my dog's bedroom.
honestly, they'd be so happy there.
Yeah.
They can run around and be crazy.
Yep.
Uh,
So yeah, I'm super excited about that. I'm still waiting to get my taxes back so I can prove that I make money. Owning your own business and trying to buy a house is like not something I thought would be as complicated as it is, but it's so complicated
a lot of red tape
because it's
because
like
you have to like prove your income and all of that. And
in like 14 different ways. They're like, what about your taxes from last year? And I'm like, but you can't do anything with those because that's why I haven't been able to buy a house yet. They're like, well, we still need them. And then they call me and they're like, well, this isn't going to work. And I'm like, I know it's not. I told you it's not going to work. Like, why are you calling me to tell me the thing I already told you? Like, come on. But yeah, I'm just leaving it all in God's hands. I'm like, when it's supposed to happen, when it's meant to be, it will be. But I'm falling in love with it. But what's so interesting about all of this is I don't know if I've ever really talked about like in 2011 when God first gave me this vision of the community that he said you're going to build a community.
Mm.
Um, and then it was, you're going to start a foundation. And I'm like, what does all of this mean? Why are you showing this to me? But now that I'm here 14 years later, 13 years later, whatever, looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the fruit of my labors. Or like, I feel like, even though it's a big purchase, it's like the fruit of my labor is finally beginning to be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that once we launch the book and get that whole thing going, that'll just add to giving me more time to kind of maybe not see as many clients face to face, but focus more on writing and getting the next book published and working on my dissertation. And
I'll be right there with you on
a lot
that.
is changing, a lot is happening. It's super surreal right now. Very, very, very humbling. I think I cried all morning in church. I was just like, until this lady started filing her nails behind me.
Oh, that'll make it stop, right?
I was
And you're
like,
like, now I'm annoyed.
misophonia, right? So like when
Yeah.
I'm trying to focus and study, it's like if somebody starts eating potato chips during a test, like
Hmm.
my jaw got so tight. And so I turned around and I just smiled politely and she didn't do anything. And then so I'm sitting there and then I can hear she picked it back up again. And I looked at my mom and I was like, I'm gonna have to move seats soon. So don't be surprised if I get up and move up a few rows. And she was like, what? Okay. And then she stopped again when she heard me say that. And then she picked it right back up and started again. So I just moved 2 rows forward. It gets me. I get so distracted. I'm just like
Yeah.
this ticking, beeping noise in the background, but it's like, like my mom's like, I didn't hear anything. And I'm like, that's why you didn't have to move. I was like, but for me, I was like, I'm either going to lose it on this lady in church and completely just show face. Because I never realized like how much that like agitates me.
Yeah.
But like all you can do is move someplace else. So just get up and go. It's okay. You're not
Mm.
responsible for how anybody feels because you have to get up and move someplace. Like this is your mental disorder. It's
Right.
nobody else's problem. So control what you can control. And if you have to give up, just get up and move. And like I wasn't angry about it or anything. I was just like, why? And I was like, breathe through it. I was like, God, can you like distract me so I'm not hearing this? And I'm like, I'm totally missing everything that Pastor's talking about because
All
it's
you can hear is that.
so loud to me. But
Well, and I think, I don't know if that's,
who files their
I,
nails at church? That's what I
I,
want.
yeah, that's also a valid question. But I started carrying a set of loops with me, which are like really fancy earplugs, and you can tune the dial to however much noise you want to let in. Because there are certain environments where I just get super, super overstimulated if it's like music plus a bunch of people talking, and there's just, if I feel like the walls are kind of closing in on me, I put them in and I'm a different person. Like it's right before I get to the point where I'm just like, I'm going to freak out. Like, and even my husband now knows, like, when I reach for the loops, he's like, feeling a little overstimulated. I'm like, you have no idea. I'm like,
Yeah,
and I'll
like it.
just,
How do you know you're neurodivergent? Like people chewing, filing your nails, like certain colors.
and normal people may not even recognize that. They have no idea that that's even a noise, like because it blends into their environment. But like him chewing, I try my best. That's where I'm like, Lord, please do not let me pop off on my husband today because especially if it's oatmeal and it's like I'm
Oh
like
yeah,
that it's the sloppy sound. I'm like, I have to excuse
my
myself.
mom
Like,
was stuck together eating mashed potatoes. I had one of my friends a long time ago. She said that to me. She was like, if you were my boyfriend, I would have to break up with you because of
yeah, yeah, I get it.
that
I
was
think
the best stuff I learned about misophonia. But I remember in school, like elementary, middle school, back in the day when we had big box TVs and you'd have the blue screen.
okay.
TV would be on, but like nothing's playing on it, that
Yeah.
sound would drive me
Yeah.
bonkers. Like I'm just like, can nobody hear the silence of this room right now? Like it's just buzzing in my ear. But
Your silence is deafening.
I definitely probably, well, my mom said that when she went to her last doctor's appointment, they had her taking a bunch of assessments. And he came back and was like, did you know that you're on the ASD scale? And she was like, what does that mean? And he was like, you have autistic tendencies. And she was like, oh. And I'm like, that makes so much sense to me now. Like, of
Okay.
course, of
Yeah.
course.
Yep. I remember my mom saying
Just
she
think,
came home from that appointment one time. She and my brother got diagnosed together, family affair. And I'm 15 and I'm in like complete dissociation mode. She was like, everything the doctor described, I kept thinking, that's Laura. And I was like, stop talking. No, it's not. I don't need a diagnosis.
here.
But
I never got any I've been diagnosing myself since the day I started my master's program. I'm like, well, that went on, never learned.
it's
But
convenient.
the coolest thing about it is I can look back now and really see how God was the one who cured me of all of those ailments. Like this wasn't me ever taking medication for anything. This wasn't ever, I never sat in therapy for years and years and years or ever, like at all. Didn't even know what counseling was until I became one.
Yeah. Which is that's a really cool way to, go about it though. Like you still healed just in a different way.
Yeah. Well, now it's like being a counselor, I see all of these amazing tools and techniques, and I'm just like, yeah, those are all written in the Bible. Everything that we do in the counseling field is biblical. Every single thing. There's nobody out there who can say it's not. Even reading this book, the first two chapters, I'm like, that's a scripture verse. That's a scripture verse. Those are scripture verses. That's biblical. That's biblical. And I'm like, we just are writing it in languages that other people are hearing.
Yeah. Because this book is not based in Christian values like the first one was, but
Right.
we're still finding strong parallels. Because I
Even
also
the
had
first
this.
chapter where she was like, you know, how when she talks about when I first started this, every church I went into was like, well, you can't, use foul language. So don't say things like bullshit. And she was like, okay. And then she'd go speak at secular places and they're like, don't mention your faith. And she's like, what? Like,
What is going on here?
I have faith and I
Yeah.
have a
And
brain
I
in
swear.
my head and I'm, studying and doing research. Like both of those things go hand in hand. And it just always takes me back to this black and white world that so many people want to live in. Like you're black, I'm white. You stay over there, I'm over here. And it's
Mhm.
like, no, like we have to accept both the black and the white so we can try to figure out how to navigate in the gray area. Because that's where we all are. Like everything about being balanced is, oh, my hand's up now because I raised my hand. This is so
I
silly.
keep forgetting it does that, but go on.
Inches.
No, but you're right. And I feel like it's all gray area. I'm the longer that time goes on, I feel like there is no black and white. I feel
Yeah,
like it's all gray area. And that's because we're constantly trying to find balance between two people or a group of people. And like there's no clear-cut answer to hardly anything.
it takes me back to like the bell curve. You know the bell curve?
Yep.
So the black and the white to me are like those 99 percentile area, like the 96 to 99%, whatever it is that they have at the very ends of the bell curve. Like if you're operating in those areas, seek out professional help. Like that's you're not functioning very well when like probably really at all if you're in those areas. But everything in the 66 percentile, like in the middle part of that, like you just want to find balance. Everything in life is, if you're like, always optimistic, then you have to start training yourself to look at things from the pessimistic viewpoint so you can find balance between the two. Otherwise, you're going to reject anything and everything that sounds pessimistic, even though that's the reality of the situation. And you're just going to live in this like happy go lucky world, and then you have the more melancholic type people that are just like very pessimistic and, well, it's not a big deal, just what, and they minimize and minimize. Like, that's not a healthy place to stay either. Like, you don't have to pretend and be like, oh, everything's great today, and I'm just going to lie to myself. Like, that's not what it's about. It's being able to say, when does being positive serve me? When does being negative serve? Like, all of those things serve a purpose in some way, shape, or form. And it's
Agree.
always about your perspective and the experience of where you're at. But not everybody's in that same place as you. So
Right.
to learn how to become, like she talks about that too, how to become curious. And I've been telling people that, like, stop being judgmental, like, learn to ask questions. If you don't know how to ask questions, then then you are going to suffer from narcissism, the grandiosity, the arrogance of life. Like, questions are what give us information from others. It's what helps us learn to listen. So,
And not assuming you already know the answer to the question, but always asking for clarification, making sure that you are following what that person's saying, because that also validates that you're hearing them when you're
yeah.
asking back. But very good thoughts.
So before we get started, we're going to go ahead and open up in prayer.
Let's do
Prayer is something that we are working on right now in our church, in our small group. I'm leading a small group in prayer. Um, and, just taking a moment to pause, to ask God, you know, for his insight, his guidance, I guess, so to speak. Um, to
really,
rejoice, to yield.
to
So,
really, we're really ruminating deeply on each and every verse. And it's a small section, but it's easy to read a devotional in the morning and read your two sentences and then be like, okay, I'm done, and not
yeah,
really think that much more about it. But when you spend 5 minutes praying over it and then rereading it and rereading it,
yeah.
and maybe you'll get something out of it in the moment. I mean, I have each and every time so far, but maybe it'll come to you later in the day. But like, that's something that you have to be intentional about.
I like to ask, why is this important and how can I apply it? So,
Good strategy.
all right. Heavenly Father, we just come before you. We just ask for you to be present with us in this moment. We ask that you bring us into your presence so that we can do this from your perspective, from your truth. I pray over everybody who's listening that you would just use this time to reach their hearts in a way that only you can reach their hearts, Lord. We just thank you for being with us throughout all of this and help us to learn and to listen. In Jesus' name, I pray. All right, everywhere and nowhere. Chapter 1. I actually did myself a favor and I took notes this time instead of just highlighting.
Okay.
So um, I have some questions that I've brought up along the way as well. So she says, everywhere and nowhere often can, she said it left her feeling swallowed by fear. So, quote unquote, she said, in these uncertain and risky moments of vulnerability, I search for inspiration from the brave innovators and disruptors whose courage feels contagious. So, what points, is there anything that you've gone through recently that was uncertain and felt risky, where you're being vulnerable, but then you found inspiration and bravery and courage that was contagious?
I mean, it's still pretty recent, but putting our cat to sleep was a hard decision. Um, but I think also, I don't know, we've been in just kind of a week of, life isn't super exciting or happy just because we're kind of grieving that loss. But um, maybe just having the courage to just pick up and keep going and be thankful, just like any sort of loss that you might experience. I mean, they're all going to be different somehow, but um,
True.
I think that it kind of, I just noticed this past week I was just not quite as bubbly of a person as I normally am. And making the choice to still show up anyways was my goal, I think. You know, I have to go to work and I still have to, I still have students who are depending on me and I still need to monitor my interactions with people and things like that. But
How about, how about so, bringing authenticity, this is a great transition, but we just read authentic,
mhm.
you know, being not the bubbly person that you normally are, how would you say you're showing up as your authentic self in those moments?
Probably just what we were just talking about with not necessarily being pessimistic, but when people ask you, how are you today? Just like, you know what? Today's tough, you know, and not everyone is prepared for you to answer honestly like that, but I'll just say, and I'll tell them why. Like, yeah, I can't pretend that I'm not sad or that I'm not struggling, and here's why. And most people so far have been like, oh yeah, I get that. I had a pet that passed, and you know, it's really hard and blah blah blah. Um, but just not being ashamed of not being in a positive state. Like I think that's important to just allow whatever is happening to happen.
Mhm.
Um, again, within, you know, reason. I'm not gonna, you know, be like, don't talk to me because I'm in a bad mood, that kind of thing. But you know, respectfully and honestly answer people. Um, and I think also just being kind to myself, like knowing that this week probably needs to look different than some of my other weeks in terms of energy and priorities and things like that because I grew up um, ignoring a lot of my trauma, if you will, or situations that should have upset me, or they did, but and I rightfully should have probably expressed it in that moment. I just shoved them down. And I kept on going like nothing ever happened. So now I know that, you know, I know the result of that is disastrous. So just dealing with it in the moment and being like, you know what, if I need to go cry it out, I'm going to. Or if I need to just log off for a while, that's what I'm going to do. And I think the other struggle has been also trying to comfort my spouse, who was even more um, connected to her than I was. So, and that can be that's been our challenge too, is because when you're grieving and you want the other person to comfort you, but you also need to comfort them, you know, it's a funny place to be because we're both like, well, what are we supposed to do here? But yeah, we're navigating it, I think. But it wasn't like a horribly, terribly down week. It was just a little bit overcast, you know. Um,
It is the coldest month of the year.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Winter in Ohio is
spring
hard.
comes, like we're all just in the home stretch of the winter season being over.
This is why I'm like every day I'm like, guess how many days till Jamaica? I'm like sending you a number.
Countdown to Jamaica.
Yeah.
So for me, it was crazy that we started reading this when we did because Friday night I went to the Night to Shine that our church hosts. So for anybody who doesn't know what Night to Shine is, this is a event that the Tim Tebow Foundation started to celebrate just anybody and everybody who has exceptional needs, or any sort of, maybe, I don't know what you would call it, a disability of any kind.
Mhm.
Um, and every time, so this is my second year volunteering. The first year I was in Myrtle Beach and I did a huge church. So it was just like so many people there. And this was a little bit more smaller. I think there was only 60 guests versus like the couple hundred that were at the other one. But I always get so nervous before going. Like that is outside of my element. My undergrad was in applied behavior analysis. So, I was taught how to work as a counselor with, the neurodivergent population. But I never actually have worked in that, and I don't have like family members or anybody really close who have special needs. So me going there, I feel out of place. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
who am I to be here? Why would I even need to be here? But they, they say that they need, us volunteers. And to me, the first year that I did this last year when I was at Night to Shine, I do with the buddy. So I have they have a buddy system where they pair, every guest has a buddy that they, walk around with. And so you help them in any way that they need it. Um, so the first year I did it, I was paired with a young lady who was in a wheelchair. And I'm sitting here like, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea how to do any of this. Like, what am I supposed to do? And throughout the whole night, it was just like laughing and conversing and asking questions and sharing. And like, it was the most humbling thing I've ever experienced in my whole life. Because here we are, we tend to look at people with disabilities as there's something wrong with you, where they all look at themselves, they're so happy, like it's just like this, they are the most courageous people I've ever been around. They smile and they laugh and they love each other, and they're just so kind and compassionate in every sense of the word. And that's like what really teaches me, like, how to look at everybody from a very unique and individual. So, like, we see people with disabilities externally, but for me, like, I feel so internally disabled in so many ways, emotionally just broken. And, you can't see my pain or the wounds or the things that I've been through on the surface of me, but deep down inside, like, I'm just as vulnerable as the next person. We all share in this beautiful world of humanity. And I love that she talks about this in the book about our shared humanity. Like, if you can't see people, as the just like in the authentic book, the unique individual that God specifically created you for, like, to not be able to see the other side, like, like, so many parents I've worked with who have children with special needs who come into therapy. And, their stories are, at first, we're just like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? This is going to be so difficult. And then once they start living it, they're just like, you changed and fixed all of the brokenness in our own lives, like just this unconditional love. And I don't know, it's just such a beautiful place and experience to just be around where there is no judgment. Like, literally, there's no judgment. And to me, that's what heaven on earth is. That's bringing the kingdom of God to this world. So anyways,
Gonna make me cry.
cry, like, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
I have
Uh,
a friend who has a little boy with Williams syndrome, and it's one in every 10,000 births. So, and she's actually spoken to my classes several times. And this little guy has had more surgeries than any of us will see in a lifetime.
wow.
Um, he was born with a problem for every developmental system there is, but he has a narrowed. She'll probably comment on the Facebook right now because she I know that she'll probably watch. Which, hey friend, um, he has narrowed valves in his heart, not valves. So what are the long things? I am not cardiac
Arteries, that's
arteries or yeah. Anyways, his heart is really um, in not good shape, and he also had to have rods put in his back because his spine started to curve and just thing after thing after thing. But every year there is a conference for Williams syndrome people, and it's like the it's like kind of sounds like Night to Shine. Um, they go there and they spend this whole week together, and they are the happiest people. They're always introducing themselves, they're always playing instruments, they're dancing, they're singing, and like they are the happiest kids, even though they have um I think their life expectation is like 50 at the most. It's not big, but like they don't it's they're unaffected by it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where they're just with their people.
Yeah. So she goes on to talk about her research into this, and the vulnerability that she felt as she started this research and writing this book. And she said, I began to summon up men and women who have shaped the world with their courage and creativity and who have, at least on occasion, pissed people off. New worlds are important, but you can't just describe them. Give us the stories that make up the universe. No matter how wild and weird the new world might be, we'll see ourselves in the stories. So when I read that, it reminded me of a PowerPoint presentation I did in one of my first 2 years of my doctorate program. Um, and the whole thing was about how our narratives are what connect us. So, like in the counseling field, there's a lot of no self-disclosure, or you have to be very, I mean, you just have to know how to use it in a way that helps the client, right? So, but to me, when they were talking about that, I'm like, I've already done so much research on this, and our narratives are what connect us. Your story and my story, us being vulnerable and telling each other our stories and being like, oh my gosh, yes, I've never been through that, but I know what it feels like to feel devastated. And that we can connect on the emotion. Our emotions are what help us connect. It's the stories that we tell. When you watch TV or a movie or whatever, you're not crying, during a sad scene because you've been through what they're going through. You're crying because it relates to something similar to this emotion that you have experienced, and your brain is putting yourself in that position as if that is you.
Yeah.
So when I work with people who struggle with empathy, um, I tell them, empathy comes from a place within us that we share with that person. So if you're unwilling to go to that place within yourself, you're never going to be able to empathize with somebody else, because we have to go to our own hurt places to match somebody in their hurt place. We have no problem doing it when we're pissed off, but it's always about, when you can't empathize with somebody, you don't match with compassion, and you have defensiveness and that resistance, you're resisting your own feelings and emotions. It has nothing to do with that person. They're
Mhm.
bringing something that's out of you that's already inside of you.
That's what we call a check yourself. Right?
Yourself.
Yeah.
We see ourselves in our stories, right? So the importance of discomfort during learning. Yeah, like you don't learn if you're not uncomfortable. Like
Mhm.
everything about life is becoming uncomfortable, like growth, if you're trying to grow and learn. And so going to the Maya Angelou poem that she talks about in this chapter, Still I Rise, she says, you are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. So, how do you belong nowhere and everywhere?
She actually she was very annoyed by that. And it says for over 20 years, whenever that quote came up, she felt a rush of anger because why would she say that? That's not true. Belonging is essential. We must
Yeah.
belong to something, to someone, to somewhere. Um, and I guess fast forward, I didn't mark the page, but it does eventually make sense to her.
She talks about the polarization.
Yeah.
If you want to belong somewhere, you have to first accept that you also belong nowhere. It's this black and white, one end of the spectrum and the other. When I will repeat it, you will hear me all year, probably through every single one of these books talk about this. But if you cannot find balance between the black and the white, that is where peace lies, is in the middle of these two extremes. And that's when you got to start checking yourself. Am I falling too far in one direction or too far in the other direction? Do I only hang out with people who think and believe like me, or am I open to exploring and learning from people who think and believe different from me? Because we all want people to do that for us, but then we get pissed off, because you think differently than me and you should think this way. And it's like, well, how can you say that, but tell me I can't say that because I believe the same thing? I don't think you should believe the way you believe. You should believe the way I believe. And so now we're in conflict back and forth instead of going, you know what? I can totally honor and see where you're coming at from your perspectives. This is
Yeah,
why I wouldn't do that, but I'm not going to tell you you're wrong.
right. I
This
think
is
that's
this is
happening,
what I've learned in my experience. This is where I'm at now.
and that's happening a lot in our political environment right now.
Oh yeah.
The polarization, not to, bring politics into it, but that's just the strongest example. And a lot of the people that I see, you're either 100% over here or 100% over here. And like, there's nobody looking at the issue and removing themselves. Not nobody, but many are not. How do you really truly feel about the issue, not the person behind it? Or that is what causes a lot of that,
It's that
you know,
rejection.
right.
I've
Yeah.
had clients come to me who tell me, friends that they've had for over 10 years are like, well, if you voted that way, then you're not my friend and I can't ever speak to you again because you have no respect for people like me. And it's like,
It's,
what?
yeah, it's a
Don't
big jump. And
So does
I,
that mean the same thing? Like if you're the person that you wanted to won, like we wouldn't be sitting here rejecting it. But I'll tell you, there was a report that I had read years ago, maybe 7 to 10 years ago, that said that there are less than 2% of people who can think outside of dichotomous terms. Do you know how small that is? So my mission in life is to train and teach as many people as I can to learn how to think outside of dichotomous black and white thinking. Because that is where all of your trauma, your stress, your anxiety, your depression, that's all because you can't find balance between one extreme and the other. You're unwilling to look at the other side and say, how does that also serve me?
yeah.
We get
That's,
so caught up in our own world. Everything revolves around me. We are in a crisis of selfies. And this is where anytime we have this narcissism, again, this word, this conversation about it, like if you're the person going around calling everybody a narcissist, I hate to break it to you, but you're also the narcissist. You're just on the other end of the spectrum and you're unaware of it.
yep.
So
Yep.
it's like you gotta look in the middle ground. You've got to be able to say there is good and there's evil. And sometimes we have to accept what evil is in this world. And maybe one day, on the flip side of things, yeah, we'll live in a world where there's no negative energy. But in the meantime, like that's a part of this world. So finding balance and acceptance in that is to me where a lot of the peace comes from.
Mm.
But
And I think, yeah, that's definitely important to note because when you're anything that's one-sided is going to be top heavy, imbalanced, and that's why it feels so heavy. Um, I highlighted it regarding the quote. I highlighted even in the context of suffering, poverty, violence, human rights violations, not belonging in our families is still one of the most dangerous hurts. And that's
yes.
because it has the power to break our heart, our spirit, and our sense of self-worth. It broke all three for me. And when those things break, there are only three outcomes, something I've borne witness to in my life and in my work. And she says, number one, you live in constant pain and you seek relief by numbing it or you inflict it on others. Number two is you deny your pain and your denial ensures that you pass it on to those around you and down to your children. Or three, you find the courage to own the pain and to develop a level of empathy and compassion for yourself and others that allows you to spot hurt in the world in a unique way.
Amen.
I just loved how she summed it up to those three things. And I was like, that is absolutely.
And that's a good question to ask yourself. Are you number one, number two, or number three? Do you live in constant pain and seek relief by numbing it or inflicting it on others? meaning you smoke pot to get rid of the emotion, the anxiety, you drink, turn substances are easy. Do you turn to relationships? Do you
Mhm.
tend to seek out and numb everything through spending money and buying things? There are eating food. There are so many things that we will use to deny the pain that we're in and seek relief in ways that are actually not relieving us of anything.
They're detrimental.
Or do you deny your pain and your denial ensures that you pass it on to those around you and down to your children? Do you live in this, make believe world that negative things don't happen and you just don't think about them and you don't talk about them and therefore you won't manifest them? Like, no, like, or do you kind of like fall in the gray area and you have the courage to own the pain? You develop empathy and compassion for yourself and others. And what I've learned because I'm a number three now, finally, gone through 14 years of recovery to get there. Um, but that is what I learned is I can connect with people. I can see hurt and pain in a world and the way that only God created me to be able to see it. To live in denial of that robs you of your future
Mhm.
and the future you could have if you would just accept what was, live one step at a time in this moment and leave the past in the past. Learn from it, bring what you've learned from it with you, but leave the emotion of it, the pain, the bitterness, all of that with it. Um, and this goes into when she says on the next page, perspective is a function of experience. We
Mhm.
all share unique perspectives because we've all been through our own multitude of different experiences.
Mhm.
So yes, mine is just as important as yours, and yours is just as important as mine. But one of us probably has grown further than the other one. People that I've talked to who are just starting to look into their trauma, trust that because I've worked through this for 15 years, I probably have a different perspective. Now, your unique perspective is going to help me, but you also equally have to accept that my perspective is going to help you.
Mhm.
So you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, you haven't been through what I've been through, so you don't understand."
Right.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
one perspective. How
Right.
about a different perspective that says, I don't have to go through what you went through specifically to understand your pain.
Mhm.
Like, I do understand pain. It might not be yours specifically, but your denial of my empathy is your shame, which Brene Brown teaches about that as well. So if you will not receive empathy and comfort and care and connection from others, it's because you're walking so deeply embedded in your shame that you refuse and you reject the very thing that's meant to help you heal. And you're the person who's making that choice. You're responsible for your misery. Nobody else is.
Mhm.
It's a choice that we make. So perspective is
Mhm.
a function of experience. Um,
I remember having to make that decision because that up until I was about 29, that was how I lived life. And that was um there was a lot of denial, dissociation, um, sarcasm, a lot of coping mechanisms that were unhealthy, but how I learned, I guess, at that time to survive. But then, you know, I didn't need those things anymore, but I wasn't ready to leave them, if that makes sense, because that is how I had masked it. And when it came to the point where it was like, this is going to destroy your marriage if you don't deal with it. Um, and I feel like maybe the reason that people run from this so much is because when you've built up years and years and years of things that are, you're almost afraid of the emotion that's going to come out of you because of the level of pain that's in you. And
mhm,
that's really what I was running from. I was like, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel this at all because I know it's going to be big and it's going to be out of control. And that's the point where you seek professional help at that point, and I did. But
mhm,
um, that was something that I was like, I I actually I do have a choice. It's either stay in this rut for the rest of my life and let a man that I love very much walk away from me,
Mm,
or face it and like own up to the commitments that I made to him and that I made to God. And scariest thing I've ever done. But you know what? I walked through it. It took a while. I would say somewhere around 18 months before I felt like, okay, I've got it all out of my system to some
mhm,
degree. I mean, I'm going to be living with, things for the rest of my life, but I'm not angry about them anymore. I'm not trying to shove them back down. Um,
mm.
but I think that is what I see in a lot of other people. I feel like that's what God's given me eyes for, is when I see people who are trying to run from themselves, basically. Like, no, I don't want to turn and figure out what this is like. I don't want to stop
But here,
doing what
I'll
I'm
just
doing.
run with you until you decide. I'll
Right.
be here, you're running near.
Yes. Like y'all hold it up to your face. But I do think that, that's a lot of it, is that we don't want to even pause to let it wash over us because we're afraid of what we're gonna look like, or what's gonna become of us. And um because you already know that it's hard enough to keep it down. Like, what's it gonna be like when it comes out? So
Mm.
I just remember that being, my biggest thing. But at the end of the day, I just chose to embrace it, and it's the best thing I could have done.
I found I found a couple scripture like I don't know, when I was reading through this, obviously the Holy Spirit brought to remembrance some things for me. But it made me think about, like, she says again, you find the courage to own the pain and develop a level of empathy and compassion for yourself and others that allows you to spot hurt in the world in a unique way. It made me think about, like, what's the difference between the law on relationships and the gospel for relationships? So the law says, like in Leviticus 19:18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. So this is the law. And then the gospel for relationships in Matthew 22:39 says, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself.
Mhm.
So Jesus teaches that loving our neighbor, aka anyone who needs help, and we can do something about it. That I like the way that that's said.
Mhm.
Your neighbor is anyone who needs help that you're capable of doing something about. And then, as ourselves is the second most important command in the universe. Perspective is a function of experience. So, my perspectives now versus the perspective I had before I knew Christ and knew the love your neighbor as yourself and love God, and love comes from God because he is love. My perspective then was that pessimistic flip side. Like I could only see myself as the victim. This happened to me. My life sucks. My dad was an alcoholic. He was abusive. He did these things. He was awful. My mom stayed with him longer than she should. My mom should have left earlier. Victim, 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 right?
Mhm.
My perspective now is all of those things. Like I'm not alone in that.
Mhm.
There are so many other people who have grown up in horrible situations like that. And for me to stay stuck in that victim mentality would have prevented me from getting to a place where I can literally just use that pain as a way to show you how to overcome it. Like, here's the courage. This is how you become victorious to that. It's just flipping your perspective.
Mhm.
I'm not going to look at myself as a victim. I'm going to look at myself as a victor over that. And this is what I have to continuously do to walk in victory.
Mhm.
Perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
Like I think we talked the last time that we met where you were in the prayer group, you were talking about running away from my problems. And I'm
Mhm.
like, or you can flip the perspective and say, what am I running towards? I'm not running away from my problems. I'm running towards my solutions.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, but your perspective, your focus has shifted. And to me,
Mhm.
your focus is what drives your behaviors and how you feel and what's going on in your body and how your body responds to it and the stress levels and all of that. So it's like you say the same thing, but you're saying it either from like the enemy's tactic or you're saying it from God's tactic. We have
Mhm.
a choice there. Do I say it and look at things from the way the enemy wants me to look at things as self-serving and well, you didn't get that, so you should be mad at them and you should, or do you look at it and God's like, who cares about what they have and you don't have? Like,
Yeah.
who are you to tell people what they can and cannot have? Focus on what you're doing. Like, stay in your lane. Me Brown a lot, so I hope she doesn't hate me for it.
Wait, what,
Yeah,
say that again.
here's any of these things. She's like my mentor. Like I really look up to her. I think mostly because I never learned or read anything that she has written until I was on the other side. I had been working as a professional counselor for like 3 years at that point. Basically had a lot of my, research and studies done. And then I started reading a lot of her work and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can be a loudmouth, badass, God-fearing woman. And
Mhm.
it's okay. I don't have to be a sweet and docile and, just really always just gentle and timid. Like that's not me. God didn't give me this voice and these experiences in this life to
To live
be
well.
quiet and sweet and
Yeah.
gentle all the time. Like, yes, there are times when I can bring that out now, and I've learned how to do that. But I'm a loudmouth. Like, that's just who I am, and I will always be that way. So, to minimize who God created me to be is me following and conforming to the world's ways instead of being my authentic self. Like,
But I don't think you're a loudmouth. I think you're an advocate. And like if you're looking at it from
two
an outside
perspectives again.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But also like consider your story and how people who have been through similar stories literally physically didn't survive it. And for some reason you were chosen to. And that's you're given the option,
And if
here.
I take the Myers-Briggs personality assessment, I
Mhm.
was an ENFJ, but the E and the I has always been like, and this year I've transitioned from the extrovert. So I went from the ENFJ, which is the protagonist, the person who's going to stand up on stage and fight for everybody and be a loudmouth, to now the ISFJ, same other four letters, just or INFJ. I'm just the more introverted, which is the advocate. Like I'm like, all right, God, so you've shown me that you can do both. Like these are your
Yeah.
two unique personalities.
Yeah.
And I advocate. I will stand up to anybody who's putting somebody else beneath them. Like, no, you're not going to do that. You're allowed to do that, but like you're going to hear the other side of it
Mhm.
if you're going to choose to do that. Like
Yeah.
treat people as equals. Like that's just it is what it and that's biblical too. So we won't go there,
No,
but
no, but you're right. But I also think like um part of I mean, I've always been a big introvert, and maybe I'm not as much as I used to be because, like I said, I had to learn how to step into my own career and be extroverted so I could teach, and that's really where my passion lies. But I also find with the introverted moments, that's when I hear God the best. That's yes, sometimes he'll show me things when I'm out in the wilderness, and especially like whenever we're on the ground in Belize, we see things happen all the time, and people come up to us and tell us about their miracles. But it's majority of the time it is the preparation for that is in the quiet.
yeah,
And so I think it's very possible to be both, and it's important to have, you know, both aspects. And like you said, like learning to be one or the other, like we gravitate towards one or the other, but maybe that's the lesson. God's wanting us to learn how to be more of each thing, you know.
yeah.
I also highlighted um, I knew about the secret fighting, and I knew I didn't belong with those friends. So she's talking about her parents always fighting when she would come home, and telling herself that her parents were the only ones in the world who were struggling to keep their marriage together. She felt ashamed. And all the friends of my brother and sisters who played at our house called my parents Mr. and Mrs. B with a casual cool like they were great, but I knew about the secret fighting, and I knew I didn't belong with those friends whose parents were as awesome as the ones on TV. So now the shame of secrecy was piling in too. Um, and that really spoke to me because I also was one of those, like I said, I didn't really show a lot of what was happening. Um, and I had kind of two sides of the coin. I had, you know, the immediate family problems, and then I had the external family problems because I was a child of divorce and we
Mhm.
had split custody. So it was just moving from one environment to the next. But honestly, the second one was worse. But for a lot of people, it was something that I carried myself because I thought it was just me who experienced it. Um, and it was very hard for people to understand like a dad who disowned me at 12, you know. Um, and then also having like a grandmother who was very controlling and like just so many things that all so many different adults in my life at that point and very few positive relationships. But that was hard for a lot of kids to understand because, I would go over to their house and I would see like it looks like they've got everything that they could ever want here. Like they have a happy pair of parents and they have a dog and they have a swimming pool and they have all these things. And we also were really poor growing up because we lived in West Virginia. So like we struggled in a lot of different ways. And I would tell my story to some at some point up to a certain level. And then students, look at me. People would be like, wow, that sounds really hard, or they would ask questions, but nobody really empathized. They couldn't really understand. So eventually I stopped telling them. And so that was something that stuck out to me in the book just because it was like if people really knew the truth and it's almost validating to that inner child because it was somebody else who was like, when I go home at night, I hide where I'm going home to. And when I go to school, I don't say much or I don't do anything other than sit down and do my homework and maybe talk to a couple of friends, but I was a pretty quiet person. Um, and I still remember to this day going back to a high school reunion, like after dealing with all this, and one girl walking up to me and being like, "Hey, Laura, how you doing? And what are you up to these days?" I'm like, "I'm a college professor." And her her mouth just dropped open because it did not compute with who I was in high school. I
Right.
was invisible in high school. So, and she just stared at me for like 2 minutes, and I was like, "I'm not joking. I mean, there's probably a lot I could tell you, but we could go sit down somewhere." But um, that was kind of the realization of how far I had come in that moment. But
Yeah.
definitely, I think relating to her childhood experience. But And then she said sometimes the most dangerous thing for kids is the silence that allows them to construct their own stories, and the
Mm.
stories that are almost always casting them as alone and unworthy of love and belonging.
Yep. I had that story. I mean,
Yep.
I came from an abusive home. Um, but my biological father was a drug addict, an alcoholic. Just, I mean, he was the youngest of 11 siblings. His oldest sibling, I think, was like 30 years older than him. Like, can you imagine just growing up? And they were already, some of them were drug users and he just got caught up in it. And he was a young dad. And my mom was 15 when she met him. He was 17. They started having kids when my mom was 17. So, like, you get kind of caught up and sucked into that life. And then, because you didn't do things the way your parents thought you should, you get kind of chastised or shunned or disowned or and it's a lot of it all is our own perspective, our own story that we tell ourselves that I'm unlovable because I'm not doing this the same way that my mom wants me to, or because of the way that my dad or we just tell ourselves these stories. And then because we tell ourselves these stories for so long, we become adults who are still operating in those stories
Yep.
when you finally sit down and have the hard conversation and say, this is, how I feel and what I think because of my childhood. As an adult, you now understand where they're coming from a different, like for me to get to the point to forgive my biological father for everything that he did to me. I mean, I was hanging out with drug addicts and drug dealers, and like I saw that side, and then I started to understand the story from that perspective where I was like, oh, you're just like the rest of us. Somebody got you to do this thing and it becomes an addiction and you don't know how to kick it, and it could happen to literally anybody at any point in time these days. So it's learning to sit with them in those dark places and say, you're not alone. Like, I will be here with you. I'm not going to enable this. I'm not going to get stuck here with you, but like, I'm not going to run away from it and hide either. Like,
Yeah, and I think that was something that later on, like you said, like when you're an adult, you realize why the adults in your life acted the way they did when you were a child. Doesn't make
mhm,
it right, but you start to understand because you know more about their story. And so that was something that I processed later on too, was like the whole basically when my parents separated at 7, my dad moved as far away as he could. You know, it was just um he buried himself in his work, and I don't think I saw him more than once every 18 months. And that was a big, big change for me because they had lived in the same house. Like we were all in the same house, but everybody was fighting. So it was miserable. But all of a sudden he was just absent. And for a long time, I was real bitter about that because, and then there were years, literal years that went by where I didn't hear from him. And one day he picked up the phone and just called me. And I I answered it. I was like 15 or 16 at this point, and I kind of froze for about 30 seconds, deciding what am I going to do? Am I going to talk to him or am I going to hang it up? And I did just keep the conversation going. I wasn't even sure why. I just did. And things started to come back together and it took a while. But then once my relationship with my grandmother, I got a little bit older. Around 19, we had a big, huge falling out. And it was at that point that I realized that she did this to all her kids. Like she was treating me the same way that she had treated him and all of my uncles.
the
Um,
same way
and
she
that,
was treated.
right, for sure. And it was also telling to me because my grandfather, whenever I would come visit, he very much, I mean, he and I, we had a good relationship, but she often got in between us, and he would disappear the week that I was there. And he would go golfing or go to the office. Or there was always a reason, but he would always come home drunk too. And there were a couple of fights where I would wake up in the morning and I would hear them yelling and screaming downstairs. The door would slam, and then I wouldn't see him the rest of the day. And but now, like it was all very confusing at the time, but now it makes sense because a lot of it just came back to those interactions. Those relationships were bad. And so I started to have sympathy because I was seeing how if that was the relationship that I had with her, how similar it probably was with him. And that's why, you know, when he had the first chance to get away from things, he got away from it. Didn't make it the right decision necessarily, but it was just fight or flight. And I think that to this day, like I still, we talk and we talk every week for, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes. But it's it's made me be more willing to be like, yeah, let's have this conversation.
Well, to me, what it sounds like when you opened yourself up and you allowed yourself to have those difficult conversations, in my professional, maybe personal opinion, perspective, whatever, the moment that you choose that is when you choose to start the process of forgiveness, of learning how to forgive somebody. And that's what the gift and the power of forgiveness is I let this go and I allow whatever needs to come in to heal and to make this better, and we'll go from there. You also have to be in a place where you are capable of doing that. Children, to your adult brain is very, very different. The childlike mentality to the adult, the vulnerability, the naivety, I should say.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, agreed. Because I had to work through that, like I said, like understand where he was coming from before I could actively forgive, and I did, and that was one of the situations too, where like that side of the family I haven't seen in a very long time, and I chose to forgive, but doesn't necessarily mean let them back in.
You
It
might
just
get to see them soon.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks, leadership conference.
There's a moment coming up where yeah, that we might have an update here in a couple months, but Um, and that was something that I had shared with you. Is just that I feel like all these fractured relationships, this is like I'm in a period of my life where God's like telling me to make it right. Just because, people are getting older, and he's moving me into the next phase of whatever it is I'm meant to do for him. And but this is one of those things where he's like, you've got to take care of this first.
Well, we can't carry certain burdens, certain maybe sins even into
Mhm.
the next, like when we grow and develop, I believe that like in my experience with this growth over the past 15 years, 14 years, there have been sacrifices. The Lord said, like, you are successful here and you will do fine here and I will love you. And you don't have to keep, doing the next thing. But if you want to understand my love at this level, there are certain things you cannot bring with you. You're going to have to leave that behind. And until you're capable of leaving that behind, this next stage, you can't. I mean, to me, I think about it like as in video games. Until you pass this level, you're not going to the next level. And you could be as pissed off and mad about it as you want to be. And it's
Yep.
not fair. And I can't pass this level. And I just want to get, you just keep doing the level over and over and over and over until eventually you figure out exactly what you need to do and to move on.
Mhm.
And so for me, it's like, okay, what level do I want to get to in my walk with Christ? Like, do I want to be like the disciples were, to where I sacrifice everything and I'm willing to die for my beliefs? Don't care, don't nothing else matters to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or and it's like once you get there, there are certain things you have to be willing to leave behind. So if you're trying to get someplace and it doesn't matter how hard you try or what you do to get there and you're not getting there, take a look at maybe some things you're not willing to sacrifice that if you did sacrifice, that would become achievable.
Yeah.
Because you're
And
not
I
going to
think
have a cake and eat it too. You can't have everything you want.
I don't even eat cake. I would love to
Things
be able to do
don't
that.
match, right?
No, agreed. I think, I guess this is only my own personal experience. I can't vouch for anybody else, but I usually know what that one thing is, and like I'm just not
Nope,
admitting it to
no, no,
myself.
this is
Yeah.
my safety thing. And God's like, no, it's not. That's the thing
Mhm.
that's been hurting you for
Yeah.
all these years that you think is keeping you safe.
Right.
And once
Right.
you let it go and you experience a new perspective,
Mhm.
once you did let that go, you're just like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known this 20 years ago. But your journey is your journey, and everybody's journey is specific to the purpose that they have.
Given the timeline of it.
That authentic book where he talks about the more you focus on your self growth, your purpose will find you. They will finally, those two things will finally merge together and you'll be walking in your purpose. Um, so
Is amazing to think about. And that's honoring and respecting yourself. So, we're talking about honor and respect God, honor and respect others, but it's also, respecting who you are as a person, acknowledging your wounds and saying, I deserve healing too. Maybe not the word deserve, but God wants me to heal so that he can use me.
yeah.
And like otherwise, what was the point of Jesus dying? There's a reason why he went to the cross and he took it for us. And that's something that he wants us to also have compassion for ourselves. But I think the moment that you learn to do that is when you step into something that, like be prepared, because he's going to say, okay, now that that's taken care of, wait and see what I do. Like, and I think I found that, the things that I was afraid of losing and the experiences and the emotions I didn't want to feel, actually now I prefer them. I would rather have a moment where I just have a breakdown over something versus holding it in and taking it out on somebody over time and destroying a relationship. Like,
And that's that, I can't remember where I read this, who who the author, who quoted it, whatever. But the quote is, when you face short, like temporary discomfort is what prevents long-term suffering. So doing the uncomfortable thing in the moment as it happens, bring it up,
Mhm.
deal with that. Otherwise, that will turn into long-term suffering.
Yeah.
So we can't stop pain from happening to us. We oftentimes have control over the suffering because
Mhm.
suffering is a mindset.
Mhm. That's true. I think, and that was one of the things too that, um, I don't know, was it last episode we were talking about embarrassment and just like how for a long time you felt embarrassed about things? My biggest thing was showing
But
negative. Yeah, and I remember as a kid being like, and I think it was because I was shamed for showing negative emotions, shamed for showing tears or, anger or whatever it was. But whenever I would get to a point where I had shoved things down so much and I knew I was going to cry and I couldn't make it stop, that's when I would really run and hide because I was ashamed to show tears. And um, I did get to the point when I was walking through all the therapy and we were putting our marriage back together. Oh my gosh, I was just like, you're just gonna have to like cry in front of people. Like you're gonna have to get over it and recognize that it's a normal thing. And now I do it all the time. Like not, not like just as like an instant go to, but if I need to, I'm just like, you know what? It is what it is. I'm just gonna let this happen. Yeah.
acceptance of it, like this
Mhm.
emotion is here, I accept it. What I do with it is my choice. So I
Mhm.
can do things that lead me to further suffering, or I can do something that leads me to overcoming.
Right.
But she wrote that in here where she said, when she got to the point where she was sick of caving and conforming,
Mhm.
rather than suffering in silence and shame, I started to talk about my fears and my hurt. I started questioning what was important to me and why it was important to me.
Mhm.
So she said, I've lived my entire life on the outside. And that was how, like, her and her husband, she talks about her and Steve connected, where they both started talking about their hurt with each other and they didn't judge each other for it. They just opened up and were honest about it.
Mhm.
Also, taking accountability, which we'll get into in just a minute in chapter 2, for those actions, because we're going to talk about her acronym. But she said, you will always belong anywhere you show up as yourself and talk about yourself and your work in a real way. You are only free when you realize you belong no place, you belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. Um, but I do want to get into chapter 2, the quest for true belonging. I love this chapter. It's the shortest one in the whole book.
But it's good.
Um, but this chapter is kind of what I've been writing about for a while. So it just
Mhm.
brought a lot of like, ooh, validation. I'm going to quote this in my dissertation when I finally write it. And here's another piece to add to the trust, the building trust aspect. But true belonging is something that we all crave and we all need in our lives. Belonging is the innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. Because this yearning is so primal, we often try to acquire it by fitting in and by seeking approval, which are not only hollow substitutes
Mhm.
for belonging, but often barriers to it. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self acceptance. How much do you accept yourself as you are? So going back to like the the night to shine, those people in there that come to that, the guests that are there are, they live this out.
Mhm.
They accept themselves as they are, their flaws, their strengths. So the buddy that I was paired with at uh this night to shine that was on Friday had an autism diagnosis. And she was showing me some of her artwork. And I was like, girl, like, this is really, really good. Like this, you are extremely talented. And she's like, ah, I just like threw that together. It's not that good. There's so many other people. And I'm like, so it's the same thing. Like we minimize what we're good at and because we know that comparison, right? There's other people that are better. But I'm
Mhm.
like, I could never do something like that. So like you're way better than I am. But that's like, this is life. Like, there's always going to be people who are worse off than you, and there's always going to be people better off than you, no
Yeah.
matter where you are on this journey of life. Doesn't matter how great your life gets, there's always still going to be people doing greater things than you.
Yeah.
And no matter how bad you think your life is, I guarantee you, you will find somebody whose life might be or feels worse off than yours.
Right.
Like you've got to be able to say, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm headed, this is what I want with my life. And this
Mhm.
is what I'm willing to sacrifice in order to achieve the thing that I want to have, to become the best version of myself.
Amen to that. And once we thoroughly belong thoroughly to ourselves and believe thoroughly in ourselves, true belonging is ours. That's something I highlighted.
Yeah,
To brave
absolutely.
and to brave the wilderness of uncertainty, vulnerability, and criticism. Belonging to ourselves means being called to stand alone, and that's being able to be brave of that uncertainty, vulnerability. That's a big word, and criticism. And we seem to have forgotten that even when we're utterly alone, we're connected to one another by something greater than group membership, politics, or ideology, that we're all connected by love and the human spirit,
Yes.
which, I
All
wanted to
part of
insert
the
there.
same spiritual journey. We're all
Yeah.
on this. Whether you're aware of your spiritual journey or not, you're on it and you're either actively pursuing it or you're idly standing in it. But you are on a spiritual journey, whether you so there, that's going to be probably a big, huge part of my research is the spiritual side of things. I know a lot of people do mind body. I mean, psychology is all about mind and body, but like your spirit is the third entity of who you are, and it is distinctly different from the mind or the body. And she talks about that. She goes into spirituality. The one thing that I do want to talk about is the anxiety that comes with standing alone, because we live in a world of anxiety, right? Like just people are consumed with anxiety right now. Fear, 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 fear. And anxiety, the three parts of anxiety are uncertainty, vulnerability, um, that she wrote down in this part in criticism. So anxiety comes from anything that is unpredictable, you can't predict the outcome, um, unavoidable, and so that you have no control over. So that's when you typically will feel anxiety. The uncertain moments, when you're vulnerable, anytime there's criticism, you're going to have these feelings. But even when we're utterly alone, she says, we are connected by love and human spirit. And this to me goes back to why God said, or Jesus told everybody, the greatest command of all is loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. You love people. If you are not loving people, you're missing the mark. Like you're missing out on all of like the greatest, the most peaceful, like to me that's just where peace is. Like you love people where they're at no matter what, and you're going to be in a place of peace. I can agree with you, I can disagree with you. It
So I'm
doesn't
still gonna
change.
love you.
Yeah, and I can still love you. Like I'll still be there for you if I can help you in any way. I don't care if you're what everybody else in the world would deem the most evil. So one of the examples is is it Jeffrey Dahmer was the serial killer who killed his victims and then ate them,
Yep.
consumed
Hmm.
them.
That would be him.
When I finally watched his whole story, like understanding his childhood, what his house life was like growing up with two parents constantly chronically fighting, a mother who was on antidepressants and never got out of bed because she was just always, her husband was always screaming at her.
Hmm.
And he found his distraction and relaxation was his dad would bring home roadkill and they would do taxidermy stuff. So he found happiness and joy in cutting up dead animals and essentially making them whole again. And then as an adult, he didn't know how to control this craving. And so he would meet people who were broken and hurting, and he would murder them, but then he would consume them because he didn't want to waste their bodies. But he didn't, I mean, he didn't know any better. He was stuck in that childlike mentality, and everybody looked at him like this monster, which that's a monstrous thing to do, right? But then when he was in prison, he found Jesus.
Mhm.
And so he started to read the Bible, and he started to learn, like, oh my gosh, everything that I did was wrong, and this is why it was wrong. And he repented, and he was so sorry for it. But the one man in the church who was a Christian made it his mission to kill him.
Mhm.
So, like, even you people who call yourselves Christians, you are not loving your neighbors. I can guarantee it. At probably certain, there are times when I suck at loving my neighbors. And then it's a check, like, who are you to judge anybody for what they're going through? And that's what do not judge. It's not to go around saying, oh, well, I can get away with and do whatever I want because you can't judge me. Like, you're taking that to the other end of the extreme now. Now we're getting out of the gray area again, and you're leaning more into the black and the white. You're taking advantage of something that was created to protect us, and you're weaponizing it.
Mhm.
And that's what the enemy does. That's what the devil, that's Satan's whole prerogative, is to take a good thing, twist it slightly to make it a weapon to serve himself or yourself.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
a really strong balance understanding between being selfless and selfish, because being completely selfless doesn't help people because you're pouring from an empty cup. Being selfish isn't obviously we're all aware of that selfishness, but there are times when selfishness is necessary. Like, there are times when I have to say no to your request and do what's best for me.
Yeah.
Like, they're both necessary parts
Yeah.
of
It's that balance again.
the acceptance of both sides. So finding that balance between those two, and being able to say, with discernment and wisdom and through experience and with time, you start to learn when it's more appropriate to be more selfish versus to be more selfless.
Well, I
And
also think that, oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, I think so. The greatest commandment Jesus said is love. The greatest of these is love. And I think that love can also come in different forms. So yes, it's the ooey gooey I love you feeling, and caring for people. And but there's also times when I'm doing this because I love you. Like if I've heard
Well,
parents
sometimes
say
the
that,
truth is
yeah,
the loving thing to give
right,
somebody. And
right, and
feel
or
it
the
deep for
denial
your
of something.
feelings.
Yeah. And like I've even, think of disciplining a small child. Like I have a niece and a nephew, and when they come over here, if one of them smacks the other one, I'm going to say, we do not use our hands for hitting, like I'm putting you in timeout because what you did was not a loving thing, but I love you. Like that doesn't change. But teaching children or teaching just in general, like this is the consequence of it, but it doesn't mean that you aren't loved or that I'm trying to abuse you or that I'm trying to be mean. It's just this is another way of saying this is how I show it because I don't want something worse to happen to you.
And I would be the person coming in and pissing people off saying, okay, so now let's talk about times when it's okay to put hands on people. When
Mm.
is it necessary to put your hands on somebody? Because it does serve you at some points.
True.
You
Might
know,
save your life.
if somebody's hurting you, you have every
Mhm.
right to defend yourself and fight back.
And that's that self-love too. I mean, it's saving your own life, but it's also like,
Looking at the balance,
yeah,
both
yeah,
sides. You can't just tell everybody that anytime you put your hands on somebody, you're evil. Like, there are times when that is necessary and it serves you.
yeah.
Because if somebody's coming at you swing, and I guarantee you're going to swing back. Like, you're going to defend yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be a hypocrite and say that everybody who does this is evil, or nobody who, and this is where you get so caught up, and this is politics too, where you get so caught up in one side or the other. Like, you can't even see the gray area. You
Yeah.
only see things from your own perspective and your own pain. Like, look at the pain from the other perspective.
Yeah,
But
and I think we accept a lot of the perspectives that speaking of social media and things, like we read the title and then we accept at face value. And I think that's something I've had to learn as a person, is to do your research, speak to the individual yourself, especially as a professor. Like, getting the full story really can change the outcome of how you see things. And I think that's important, because I mean, we have to work. Looking at both sides means gathering all the information.
So I looked up, so we talked about spirituality, and she said this is her definition that emerged from the gifts of imperfection research in 2010. So to kind of quote TM, I don't know, keep in perspective, Brene Brown's research comes from what she calls grounded theory, which means it's based upon people's lived experiences. So she says in grounded theory, researchers try to understand what we call the main concern of study participants. It's not about going out and just, psychoanalyzing and studying and watching people, or, creating a controlled group and a non-controlled group. It's, you literally just watch people, you see what's important to them, what isn't important to them, what matters, what their concerns are, and you develop your theories based upon their lived experiences. So even though, I think in her book, Atlas of the Heart, when she's talking about all these different emotions, she mentions how, Webster's dictionary might say that this is the definition of this word, but through our experience of asking over 7,000 people, their
Mhm.
perspective of this word, this is what our definition for this word is, and this is why. So that's that grounded theory. So we're just kind of putting that out there. So spirituality, she says, is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. So anytime I meet, I don't care what religion you claim to be, not claim to be, any of that. If you're not communicating with me through love and connection and trying to gain understanding, then anything that you're telling me about your religion is going to become dead to me. And that's true of the Christian faith as well. I hear people all the time like, well, Christian, the Bible says that you're supposed to X, Y, and Z, and you're sitting here. That person's just not being a good representative. It's like, and then I take into consideration also the spiritual maturity level of somebody. Like, are you an infant in your spiritual beliefs? Because like you just like go to church on Sundays and that's it. You don't really have like that one-on-one relationship with God, because I will listen to somebody with a one-on-one relationship with God about things over. And I don't care if you're a pastor of a church. Like if you're not communicating in love and compassion, and you can't understand people from their darkness and where they're coming from, like your opinion to me is meaningless. Like I just have no respect for it. um you can say it all you want, but I'm not likely to probably take that into consideration in the decision that I will make moving forward.
Yeah.
So I remember talking to somebody who was telling me about how Jesus Christ is inside of you, like you are the Christ, and he practiced the Buddhism is, kind of like the practice that he was following. So I'm
Mhm.
like, well, and I'm asking questions and I'm sharing my perspective and I'm saying, well, this is what my understanding is. And it sounds like you're coming from a really wounded place because he grew up as a Southern Baptist and had like his opinions about Southern Baptists and their strict religious beliefs and how they treated people, in the church that he grew up in, which doesn't mean that everybody who has that religious belief is the same. But
Mhm.
he was very hurt by his experience. And so he took this path. And I'm just understanding it because I walked the Buddhist path for a while. Like I try to do all of, the meditation and the internal and, not bringing Jesus Christ into it at all. Um, but there was always just something felt missing. But by the end of our conversation, he's coming out getting defensive and attacking. And, he's like, it's my life's mission to burn down every church I ever see. And I'm like, okay, love chakra, like, where did your love, peace, harmony for everyone go all of a sudden? Because, like,
Yeah.
that's your heart right there. That's who you are.
Yeah.
So I would never even choose. I said, you're doing a dishonor to your own faith by coming at me in this way and saying
Mhm.
such horrendous, like, why would you want to burn? Like, I'm not going around saying that we're gonna burn everything that doesn't believe the way that I believe to the ground. Like, I'm gonna go in those places, I'm gonna love and I'm gonna show them a different way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like you really have to have the deep, meaningful conversation and go to those really vulnerable, and maybe I'm going to push some buttons as I get there to see what your reaction is, because that's going to help me understand your level of understanding and where you're coming from. I'm not
Yeah.
going
And
to
I also think that, sorry, I also think that you don't know that person's story either. And I was thinking about this the other day. If you've I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're having a really low day, or maybe, I know I have walked through extreme depression. I've had it where I couldn't get out of bed. And when on the days that I would be like, okay, I am going to get up and go do something, the moment that I had an encounter with somebody who was negative or chastising or whatever, it just made me just want to give up, and that was like, I don't want to be that person who literally sets that person down, several feet more just because of I'm coming at them with my belief system, but I don't know how wounded they are. I don't know what they've been through. And like, you're adding to that, you're adding to their pain. And that's something as a person that I don't want to be responsible for. That is the opposite of what Jesus is saying to do. But another reason to, control our tongue and to really consider both sides is that you don't know that person's story until you've had a chance to ask them and
yeah,
get to know them and be kind to them. And it really will change your
change them, correct them, and make them different. Like, it's just
right.
how,
You can't just move in for the kill.
yeah.
And like, I think that's the thing that people get caught up in is they're like, no, there's one way to live. And I'm like, yeah, but you're leaving out the humanity aspect. And like, also, why are you so insistent on it? Why are you angry? I think these are things that you need to be considering it in your own ways before you act on it, because it seems like a very emotional decision. But that's something that I try to remind myself, and I've been humbled so many times as a professor because I thought I knew what was going on until I sat down and I asked the student, "Is this the case?" And they were like, "No, not at all," And then they would explain it. I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, that means I'm the asshole." But at the end of the day, I'm like, "I'm really sorry, and we're gonna make this right."
Self-compassion, Laura, you
Yeah,
made a mistake.
right, right, and that's the thing too. And
You
I've
asshole.
but that makes me the asshole. But it also, I've had emails from students where, I mean, I'll say I was wrong and I'm really sorry, like, and we're gonna make this better. And I remember one in the back of my mind specifically because that doesn't happen a lot where I work. And I won't even just go into that, but like, I had a student email me and say, I don't think I've ever had a professor apologize to me in my entire life or like the whole time I've been here. So thank you for doing that. Just the very act of it. And I was like, okay, I made the right decision. Like,
That mistake on for a better, on purpose, not on purpose, but like it was meant to happen,
right.
because it's through that interaction where you then showed that there are professors out there who are willing to admit when they're wrong, even
Yeah.
though most of them are probably grandiose and
A
think they
lot
know
of
everything that they know, because that's why they're professors, right? I'm an expert at this, so I teach it.
but yeah, and I think that's the fear that a lot of those college students come in with. And that's how they say, in that first 10 minutes, they figured out who you are as their instructor. Whether or not they're going to like you or not is based on how how full of yourself are you. Like, and I always tell them, my opening thing is like, I really do care about you, and if you show me respect, I will reciprocate it. Like, if you respect my policies, I'll respect you as a human. If you mess up, like, I'm going to be willing to work with you, but just don't deceive me. Like, that's the biggest thing, is be honest about it, and I will do what I can. um, and I would say 95% of the time, that's that they always reciprocate in a positive way. Like, there's always going to be that one person who just test me, but
they
uh,
probably work harder and
they do.
have more respect for you and the class in general. So
And it makes the class go more productive, more fun too.
And that comes back down to the true belonging. So she says true belonging means you are willing to stand alone in your decisions and beliefs despite your fear of criticism and rejection, which she says that is the wilderness.
Mhm,
This
mhm,
place where this is what I'm going to decide, this is my belief, and I don't care if you're going to criticize me or reject me for this. And I went through a season of rejection, like 9 months. No matter what God led me to going to, I would be obedient. I would go to that place. And within a few weeks, or not a few weeks, usually within about 3 months, I'd be asked to leave. I'd get fired. I'd get, please don't come back anymore. And I'm like, God, like, why do you keep asking me to do this? Like, what am I not learning? And he
mhm.
said, it's not that you're not learning. I need you to understand that rejection comes with the territory you're walking into. And you have to become comfortable with rejection.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, okay. And then it was also the willingness to say, even though you're telling me that I'm doing this, I will ask as many questions as I can to understand what I'm actually doing. If they're like, oh, you're just being rude. Okay, well, what am I saying or doing that you're considering to be rude? Because what I often found was your definition of rude was my perspective of being assertive and setting a boundary.
Mhm, mhm,
And so
mhm.
you think it's rude for me to tell you no, or you think it's rude for me to say, hey, how you're acting is not okay, and this isn't going to continue.
Right.
Oh, you can't say that because they're hurting. And I'm like, why well, didn't criticize, yell at, raise my voice, cut them down? I just ask questions to help them understand like how you're behaving right now is not going to be tolerated if you want to be successful. Like this isn't going to be okay.
So won't get you anywhere. Yeah. And
Um,
I mean, I think that's something that can carry over into other areas too, in other places like you can't act certain ways in your workplace or else you will get fired or
yeah.
you can't treat your spouse or your child or however you want or someone's going to intervene or someone's going to walk out. Like it's you are responsible for yourself. Um, and I know I have seen that over and over again when people are just not ready to take accountability. But I also think when I take the autonomy that I need to say, no, I'm not going to participate in this or I'm not going to do this with you. A lot of people get not I don't want to say a lot of people. I just there's a branch of family that I know that's threatening to them because they don't feel confident enough to speak up for themselves. Does that make sense? It's kind of like going with the group
And that's what
opinion.
that's what Brene Brown talks about is what resentment is.
Hmm.
A lot of times people, like she said, I thought resentment was because somebody else was doing something that I thought was wrong. She said, really, what I've discovered is resentment comes from a place of envy, and you're doing something that I'm not willing to do, and you're okay with it, and I'm not. So I'm resentful of you being okay with that when I'm not okay with it.
Right.
And so resentment is an internal place within ourselves.
Hmm.
Resentful of other people. We're resentful of our perception of what they're doing or not doing and aligning it with our willingness or our unwillingness to also do that or not do that. Um,
And I think that's
and
also developed empathy in me as a Christian person because when I see that struggle, like I have felt that struggle. I've been there, like where I feel like, well, I deserve a voice too. If you're allowed to say no, I should be allowed to say no. But then I don't have the courage, because I'm surrounded by so many people who are the peer pressure is really strong. Um, and I think the moment that you free yourself from that, you free yourself from a lot of undue stress,
we're
and
gonna do a book on that too later on, the nonviolent communication, where he talks about transitioning from emotional enslavement to emotional liberation. And I watched a video this of an older gentleman talking about what emotional liberation is. And he's like, heck yeah, it's scary. It's scary to know that you can say whatever you want, and I'm still going to be this solid person who stands up to you and isn't willing to conform just because you're getting loud in my face and you're throwing a temper tantrum and getting all emotional about it and trying to make my decisions based upon your feelings.
right.
Like emotional liberation is aligning your decisions to your values
Hmm.
and integrity, with authenticity, like all of those things are a part of. So she goes on to talk about what wilderness is, which I just wrote: wilderness equals solitude, a willingness to go to a place of solitude. It's not isolating, because isolating comes with from the context of fear. Fear is involved. Solitude is a choice. I'm choosing to be alone for a little while because I have to figure things out with me. I have to spend some time alone with God, and He's got to just work with me one on one right now. So I choose to
Mhm.
put myself in a place of solitude.
Mhm.
Vulnerability, the ability to speak up, to put yourself in a situation to be rejected.
Mhm.
Emotional, spiritual, physical quest. We're all on the wilderness, includes an emotional quest, a spiritual quest, your physical quest, whatever it is. It's an untamed, unpredictable place of solitude and searching. So we all find our way into the deep wild forest of living and learning in our unique ways. No two paths are the same. We must do certain things to accomplish true belonging. So this just echoes what we just read in that authenticity book, being authentic. Like, you are the only person who can do what you can do because you are the only one with all of your experiences, your personality, your your temperament. And sometimes what you're doing for others is not what you think it is.
Right. Right. Oftentimes it isn't because, I have found so many times, like, can you tell me what I have said to you? What does it mean to you? What do you hear? Or how do you interpret that? And like the feedback I get is so wildly different from what's in my head.
Yeah.
But it's also, it's a, it's something that I need to hear more often because again, we're making that narration in our own mind. But I want to know what the truth is to the world. Is this coming across as X, Y, or Z, or is it good? Is it bad? What is it? Give me your thoughts. Um, and I think that's also the enemy at work sometimes too, is trying to make you doubt yourself, or say that you're not measuring up. But it's to the world, it's a very different perception because if you were really that way, you wouldn't have any friends. You know what I mean? If you were really that way, you wouldn't have people around you who are willing to step in and support you.
And it makes me think, so anytime I have clients who come in who have like this narrative that, you know, my friends are only friends with me because of X, Y, and Z, and they don't really like me, or it's like they minimize their role in other people's lives. I always tell them, your homework assignment this week is to go talk to two or three of the people that you trust the most, that you're closest to, and ask them all of the things that they like about you and the things they don't like about you. I was like, because all you're telling me are all the things that people you think they don't like about you, and you're forgetting about all of the things that they actually do like about you and love about you. And you need to know what those strengths and those values are that you share with them. And then
Definitely.
they come back and they're like, that was the most scariest thing I've ever had to do, but like, we're like, I feel so much closer to them now. And it's like, yeah, you have to step outside your comfort zone and be willing to be vulnerable. Now, you
I
don't do it with people who are going to abuse you and things of that nature. Like, you have to
right.
have discernment with like who's
Trusted.
to have these conversations with. But for the most part, you will be pleasantly surprised to hear how much people that you think don't like you actually love you. Like me with my aunt. But
Yeah.
all right,
Well,
so I want to talk about, because we only have about 10 more minutes. She mentions 9 things um, that you can do to accomplish true belonging.
mhm.
Um, the first one, number one, is learn to listen. The second one is have hard conversations. Number
Mhm.
three, look for joy. Number four, share your pain.
Mhm.
Number five, be more curious. And I added in here less defensive. If you are a defensive person, learn how to turn that defensiveness into questions to become curious, to gain understanding. Because your defensiveness is telling you that you're you are projecting the story onto them that you think they're telling you.
Mhm.
Number 6, seek moments of togetherness. Number 7, be vulnerable. Number 8, get uncomfortable. And number 9 is be present without sacrifice. So don't sacrifice your values, but be present with other people. And to me, I'm like, I think I'm going to write a whole article on just those 9 things. I could write like a little small study guide for that and what each of those things means. Um, and then she goes into her braving analogy: boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that that's something I need to read and reread daily. Yeah.
so I wrote down, so like with boundaries, the first thing you need, so this is like anytime you're facing distress, conflict, whatever you're going through, like pull out this braving analogy. So boundaries, am I clear about what's okay and what's not okay?
Right.
Or are your boundaries telling somebody what they can and cannot do? Because that's not a boundary. That's you're
That's
now stepping into a control
right.
tactic. You're trying to control, which means you're stepping into your narcissism instead
Mhm.
of staying in that safe place of just authenticity. So, am I clear about what's okay and what's not okay? Reliability is simply asking yourself, am I doing what I said I would do? Do I do what I say I will do?
Mhm.
Um, and then accountability is, am I holding myself accountable? But accountability is basically, can I admit my fault?
Mhm.
Take responsibility for myself.
Mhm.
The vault is, do I share appropriately?
Mhm.
Or am I just gossiping and spreading rumors or like saying my opinion and interpretation of what somebody did because I want myself to look better than them?
Mhm.
Integrity, do I make value-based decisions? To me, that's what integrity is am I making decisions that are value-based on my values?
Mhm.
And doing the right thing no matter what. Uh, and the right thing is the balance between yours and mine, both of us together. And then non-judgment, the question to ask is, do I ask for help? Or am I saying, I don't need help, they don't need this? Because that's when you're stepping into that judgment. Am I willing to ask for help? And then the G for generosity is, do I give myself for others? And
Yeah.
being generous doesn't mean you have to give everything for everybody all the time. It again goes back to, am I able to give where I'm at, like in the season that I'm in? Like where can I serve?
Yeah.
Um, what can I do? Am I able to help in this situation? If you're unable to help in that situation, God didn't, he's not leading you there to do something.
Right.
So
Right.
just that's where you need to be like, all right, Lord, like I don't know how I'm supposed to help here. Um, because sometimes help is saying, let me connect you with somebody who might be a better fit for this. I'm
Right.
not the person to help here.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the other day when you were like going through what you were going through and kind of you were texting me and texting me and texting me. And I was like, girl, like I hear you and I understand you're going through a hard time, but I just went through something and I am in no place to offer empathy. So I apologize, but I need to just be alone for a minute. So
No.
don't think I'm
Yeah.
ignoring your text. I'm still
Right.
taking into consideration where you're coming from, but I'm also willing to say, today's not the day for me. I'm sorry.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But
No, it made sense actually. And I think again, that's also um honesty and vulnerability. Like that's something that people can appreciate more than, you know, showing up for something that you're not ready for. You know what I mean? And like,
But I think it also helps you not go into your mindset of, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? She's ignoring me. Why isn't she texting me back? Like, or, well, she's just so self-centered. Like, she's not even considering what I'm going. Like, we get into these stories that we feed ourselves all the time about
yeah,
somebody else and their inactivity or overactivity. And it's like, let them be them. Like, if you want to text me 42,000 times a day, like I'm not going to be the person who's like talking about you behind your back, but not willing to say, hey, I need you to maybe back off a little bit and how often you are texting. Not,
Right.
I'm not going to do that, but
No. Well,
there are
and I think
people who are
also,
like that, where it's like, this is
oh
too much.
yeah.
I can't keep up.
Well,
Sorry.
I know I remember actually when one of my family members finally got an iPhone, like we traded from the Galaxy, whatever, I don't know what it was. Um, and we had it was like the first group chat, and that was kind of the expectation was, why aren't you guys answering me? I guess nobody cares, like that kind of thing. And like
Mhm.
we
The
had
woe is me, vulnerable narcissist kicks in.
mhm. And then like, but if you hear about um then I came back later and I was like, you know what, I was actually just at work, and when I'm teaching I can't check my phone really. I'm talking, like, or I'm helping someone get through whatever it is, and usually that's what it comes down to, is people have their own thing that they have to get through at the end of the day. It doesn't mean they don't care, it just means that they have their hands full.
Yeah.
And I think that was, yeah, again, getting out of my own head has been one of my biggest challenges in life, because that was where I was safest as a kid.
Yeah.
Everything else around me was swirling, but inside my mind, I could tell myself anything I wanted to. So,
And we
but
all do.
yeah,
So,
but uh,
takeaway point, this is my takeaway. So, if anything from this chapter, take away your own path is made one step at a time. You're
mhm,
not following anybody's steps, otherwise, you're on somebody else's path.
mhm,
To
mhm,
me, sometimes we do need to walk on other people's paths to learn some things from them. So, if you get the opportunity to walk in somebody's shoes, use that experience, use that opportunity. But
mhm,
your own path is your own path and it's your footsteps. And to me, that's where when I was always looking for like a destination, like, God, where am I going? Where am I going? And he finally said to me, your destination, like you're there. Your destination is just walking, learning to walk with me. That's
mhm,
it. And I was like, oh, so I don't ever have, I never feel like I'm not where I'm supposed to be, because every step and every decision I make with God. And is this going to serve your kingdom? Is this going to serve you? Is this what my purpose is? And
mhm.
he's like, yep, I'm here. Let's do this.
Agreed. And I
So,
think when you step into that, and I mean, there's been so many times where I've just had to swallow my pride and be like, quite clearly, this is not what he wants me to be doing right now. Like, he's telling me that, if you really want to move forward, you need to just do this thing. You need to step it up, or stop talking, or whatever it is. Like, just
yeah.
be still. And there's so many references in the Bible. I have them hanging all over our house of be still, and I will, um, be
Kind
strong
of,
and courageous, but be still and know that I'm God and that I'll take care of it. And I think that's the hardest thing for me, because I'm like a go-getter and I want to get things fixed and done, and I want to,
and
progress,
the
but
ADHD doesn't help because that's like a go, 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 go. And
so
so
much.
for me, the be still, I had somebody prophetically speak to me. He said, I think God wants you to hear, I'm supposed to say this to you. And I said, okay. And he goes, he wants you to figure out how to be more like Mary and less like Martha.
And
And
you got it, right?
I said, no, this is like beginning of my like spiritual
Oh,
walk. Like I don't know nothing about anything. I have like I've been reading the Bible and stuff, but like I hadn't been studying it to the point where I like knew all these stories. So I was like, what the heck does Mary and Martha have to do with anything? Like, but it got me in my Bible and I was like, who's
yeah.
Mary? And now I have a book that's called How to Be More, or like Being Mary in a Martha World or something. Um, and it's all about stillness. You know,
Mhm,
Mary knew how to sit at Jesus's feet and just listen and absorb from him everything that he said. Martha's busy, 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 doing, 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 serving, 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 giving, giving, giving. There is nothing wrong with that.
mhm, mhm.
But there are times when you need to be still so you can be filled.
Yeah.
And that's where God was like, you're studying, you're journaling, you're like doing all the work. Now I just need you to learn how to sit and listen. And I was like, that's super uncomfortable. And it was. But
Mhm.
as soon as I did that and I stopped all of like the doing and feeling like I had to be and volunteering and all of that, and I just took a year to myself,
Mhm.
all of my ADHD tendencies went away. I was no longer like super sidetracked by everything. Like I was just all of it's still there. I still clean 42 different things in my house at one time. Like I start in the kitchen, move to the bedroom, move to the laundry room, move to the bathroom, move to back to the kitchen, take the dogs for a walk, come back inside, write my like I still do all of those things, but I don't feel frantic anymore when I'm doing it. I'm at
Mhm.
peace with it. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. Okay, fine, I'll go over here. I don't, my house doesn't have to be exactly perfectly clean. Like I can sit in the mess and be at peace with it. Like there's just when the still like there is so much, and this is what meditation is. It's just learning to sit and be still. Let your thoughts come. Honor that. Okay, that's important to me. God, that's important to me. Bring it to my remembrance in a time that's not right now because I'm not getting up to do that. I'm not
Mhm.
walking away from this. I'm not distracting myself from this time I'm spending with you.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that trained my brain how to recalibrate my nervous system. And everything felt a lot easier all of a sudden. I was like, okay.
You know, that's interesting because when we sat down yesterday at the home builder place, and the guy that, we had been kind of like, both of us were like, oh, look at all this stuff. We're like walking around and looking at everything like blah, 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 like a couple little birds. We finally sit down at his desk, and I don't know how the conversation got started, but um he kind of paused, and it we had you had said something scripture reference, like this is where God wants me to work, and I feel like I'm called to this community. And he said, I was just listening to this sermon this morning. Did that scare you? And but we didn't even know that he was a Christian until then, and that was, and it just, if we hadn't just sat down and paused, we never would have. And
Yeah.
that was a really cool experience because then it opened up this whole new conversation. But
Vulnerability of just saying, I love Jesus and this is why I'm moving here and this is what I'm looking for. And he was just like, what did he say? He goes, uh, are you an angel?
yeah, yeah,
I was like,
because
what?
I was just
What?
listening to this. Yeah, he was like, this podcast or this whatever I
Bill
was just watching was just about this today, and I was like, hey.
was studying this earlier, and now you're sitting in front of me preaching it to me, and I'm like, is this an angel God?
Sent to Springfield.
It makes me think of that TV show Touched by an Angel that I
Touched
used
by an Angel.
to
Yeah,
watch.
I watched that all the time as a kid.
That was a
It
good show.
always, I always cried at the end of it. It was always like, oh, because she would come down from heaven.
All right, so I'm going to close with this true belonging, her definition of it, my paraphrase kind of it as well.
Okay,
And then I'll let you close us out in prayer.
sounds good.
So, true belonging is the spiritual practice of believing in and belonging to yourself so deeply that you can share your most authentic self with the world and find sacredness in both being a part of something and standing alone in the wilderness. It doesn't require you to change who you are, it requires you to be who you are. It is being everywhere and nowhere. And my quote is um, on my Instagram is, your life is God's gift to you. What you do with it is your gift to God.
That's beautiful. It's true too. It's a great note to end on. Okay. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this conversation. And honestly, when we go into every episode, we just let you lead. And we're really grateful that you've given us so many thoughts and so many things to ruminate on. We pray that whoever has heard it or will hear it is going to be touched in some way, and that they will also continue that message to the next person who needs to hear it. And we ask that you will bless all of us as we go throughout our week. And as we continue to move through the book, we pray that you will guide us and give us even more insights. We know that you will, and help us to remain faithful in you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. Bye, everybody. Signing off.
Have a good week. Till we